This Solar Hunter build is another prime example of an already incredible setup that only got better with the transition to Lightfall. You've got infinite grenade spam, infinite orb of power generation, infinite healing, infinite weapon damage buffs, and so much more. And if that wasn't enough to convince you, it's got one of the strongest and most visually satisfying boss DPS ability rotations I have ever seen in my 8 years playing Destiny. So satisfying that it will make the 67% of you watching that are currently unsubscribed at least consider changing teams. But the only thing better than summoning infinite grenades is summoning massive armies in this video's sponsor, Clash of Clans. We all need something to do when we are forced out of the house away from Destiny, and social interaction is not it. Luckily, Clash of Clans has you covered as one of the best mobile experiences that gaming has to offer. Set in a fantasy-themed persistent world, Clash of Clans tasks you with building up your very own village using resources produced and extracted at said village, or obtained by invading other players' villages with your legions of troops. A ton of the action happens in the background too, making it the perfect pairing with Destiny, as while you're farming bounties, your village is farming gold. And the best part is, it's completely free to play. You can download it now by using my link in the description or by scanning the QR code on screen. Thanks to Clash of Clans for sponsoring the video. Now let's talk about our Solar Hunter masterpiece. Now, while I'm sure you would love to get straight into that 10 grenades in 10 seconds boss DPS combo, you first need to understand how each component of the kit functions. Only then will you be strong enough to wield this great power. This entire build revolves around our Trip Mine grenade and the armor piece to enhance it in multiple facets, the Young Ahamkara's Spine exotic gauntlets. Although the exotic perk description of these gloves tell a very vague and incomplete story. So let me tell you what they actually do, because once you understand what these gauntlets are capable of, you will realize they are one of the strongest exotic armor pieces in the entire game. First and foremost, these gloves restore 33% of your total grenade energy for every instance of ability damage. For a Solar Hunter, those options are the Trip Mine grenade itself, the melee ability and super of choice, and although it is not technically an ability, Solar Ignition procs, which occur when enemies reach 100 stacks of Scorch, also proc the grenade refund of Young Ahamkara's Spine. But it all goes so much deeper. To start with the grenade, you of course get a 33% refund when dealing damage with it. However, if you use it on a tankier enemy, such as a champion or a boss, and the explosion of the grenade does not kill the enemy, it will actually proc Young Ahamkara's Spine twice and refund 66% of the grenade. Our other abilities have some hidden interactions with Young Ahamkara's Spine as well. For example, our melee ability, Knife Trick, which throws a fan of 3 knives at targets. Of course, hitting a target with this ability will grant a 33% refund to your grenade as you'd expect. However, there is a way to get even more grenade energy refund from just one activation of this ability. With Knife Trick, if you hit multiple different enemies with the set of 3 knives thrown, you will proc Young Ahamkara's Spine for each enemy hit, meaning that if each one of your 3 knives hits a different target, then just one use of your melee ability can take your grenade from 0 to 100. Your super, Blade Barrage, also operates under this same set of rules, being able to also take your grenade from 0 to 100 all by itself. And if that wasn't enough ways to restore your grenade energy, like I said before, Ignition procs will also activate Young Ahamkara's Spine. Although you won't notice this against regular enemies that won't be able to survive the damage from just one of your abilities, this comes in handy big time when it comes to bigger foes like champions and bosses. And the best part is that you don't even have to do anything extra to activate these Ignition procs. However, it's best we save the specifics of the Ignition conversation for later in the video after we discuss our aspects and fragments. But before we move on to that, I need to tell you the final 2 benefits of the Young Ahamkara's Spine gauntlets, as if they didn't do enough already. While these gloves are equipped, you are intrinsically granted fastfall on your grenades, which of course allows you to throw them faster and farther, and immunity from Trip Mine explosion self-damage. That second one might sound inconsequential, but I can't even begin to tell you how much easier this build is to use with the peace of mind that you can point blank an enemy with your grenade and walk out without a scratch. Now, before we move on to the aspects and fragments, I must urge you to consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel if you learned something new about the young Ahamkara's Spine gauntlets today. Our first aspect is On Your Mark, which grants a stacking, weapon handling, and reload speed buff on precision final blows, granting us the maximum stack count of 3 anytime we activate our class ability. While this buff makes swapping and reloading weapons as smooth as can be, it's actually not even the main reason we use it. The big benefit of this aspect is that it grants 3 fragment slots, the most an aspect is capable of granting, which is incredibly important for this build, as you'll see in a moment. To acquire another 2 fragment slots for a total of 5, we will occupy our second aspect slot with Knock 'em Down, which in addition to giving a massive DPS boost to the Blade Barrage Super, also refunds your melee ability in full on melee ability final blows while in possession of the Radiant buff. It is for this very reason that our first fragment is to be the Ember of Torches, which grants the Radiant buff for 8 seconds to you and all nearby allies when dealing damage with a powered melee attack. It's also worth noting that, for the purposes of Knock 'em Down, if the melee ability activation that grants you the Radiant buff also lands a final blow, it will still refund the melee ability in full. This synergy is extremely important for maximizing our grenade uptime, especially when it comes to fighting waves of squishy mobs that will never soak enough hits to proc ignitions and that will also die from one hit of our grenade, thus only refunding 33% of it back to us. Having a basically infinite supply of melee abilities in turn translates to an infinite supply of on-demand 33% grenade refund through young Ahamkara's Spine, allowing your rotation against squishy enemies to be something along the lines of grenade, melee, melee, repeat. The importance of our melee ability also urges us to select the Gambler's Dodge as our class ability with this build, so that we can easily refund it at any time in the event that we miss it. Fragment slot number 2 will be occupied by the Ember of Solace to increase the duration of our Radiant buff from 8 seconds to 12 seconds. Although this increase is incredibly unnecessary for situations where you are clearing hordes of trash mobs and infinitely refunding your melee ability to continuously refresh Radiant, it helps a lot when fighting tankier targets, in which you'll greatly benefit from a longer 25% weapon buff duration thanks to Radiant. If you feel this is unnecessary for whatever activity you are playing, however, you may swap it out for something else. What you definitely shouldn't leave behind, however, is the third fragment of this build, the Ember of Resolve, which grants Cure a 60 HP heal on grenade final blows, which, if it wasn't obvious, will be happening a whole lot with this build. Slot number 4 is best filled with the Ember of Singeing, which grants 300% additional base class ability regeneration for 3 seconds after applying Scorch to enemies, which will of course occur from both our grenade and melee abilities. This is important both for maximum uptime on your class ability to consistently obtain On Your Mark stacks, and to always have a refresh for your melee ability on deck through your Gambler's Dodge. Additionally, in boss DPS situations, this fragment really helps you chain together your ability rotations to maximize the amount of grenades thrown, by allowing you to continuously regenerate your melee ability to refuel 33% of your grenade, complementing the 66% you'll refund from the grenade itself. Finally, your 5th fragment slot has 2 options depending on what type of activity you are doing. In circumstances in which add clear or survivability is the primary goal, Ember of Benevolence is the best choice to receive 200% additional base ability regeneration rate for 6 seconds when applying any solar buff to an ally. This fragment synergizes really well with Ember of Torches thanks to its ability to easily and constantly apply the Radiant buff to allies. However, if massive damage against tankier targets like bosses and champions is more your concern, you would be better off slotting the Ember of Ashes, which increases all Scorch Stack applications by 50%, which makes this the perfect time to have that ignition specifics conversation we delayed earlier. As you know, ignition procs occur whenever a target reaches 100 Scorch Stacks, and all of our solar abilities, of course, apply these Scorch Stacks when they hit targets. Specifically, the Trip Mine Grenade will scorch enemies for 40 stacks, while the Knife Trick melee ability will scorch enemies for 20 stacks per knife, for a total of 60 stacks if all knives hit. While that's great and all, Ember of Ashes bumps these scorch stack numbers up to 60, 30, and 90 respectively, meaning that ignition procs are going to happen significantly more often throughout our ability rotations. And considering ignition procs also activate young Ahamkara's Spine's Grenade Refresh, not only does more ignition procs mean more overall damage, but it also means more grenade spam to further feed this grenade refreshing positive feedback loop. The result is a symphony of various fiery explosions chained together to annihilate anything in the entire game. And the best part is that this build continues to get even stronger with a fully kitted mod setup to further enhance all of the strengths of our existing kit. We'll obviously want to begin with firepower on our gloves to generate orbs of power on grenade final blows. You can then add heavy-handed as well to generate orbs of power on melee ability final blows in situations where ad clear is the primary goal, or take bolstering detonation and focusing strike to refund class ability energy when dealing grenade or melee damage respectively for more durable enemies and boss DPS situations. Personally, I recommend the latter in most cases. You'll also want Reaper on your class item to generate an orb of power on weapon final blows after using your class ability. In addition to that, you'll take an Elemental Siphon mod matching that of your primary ammo weapon to generate orbs of power on weapon multi-kills. I'd highly recommend Harmonic Siphon in this circumstance, paired with top-tier solar weapon options like the Callus's mini-tool Solar SMG. In addition to granting super energy, scavenging these orbs of power will also grant armor charge stacks to fuel your 2 Weapon Surge Boots mods for a 17% weapon damage buff to any element of your choosing. I'd recommend your primary solar weapon for ad clear situations or your heavy weapon for boss DPS. You'll then extend the duration of these armor charge stacks with time dilation on the class item, increasing the duration of each armor charge stack from 10 to 15 seconds. The final mod for the core of this build is arguably the most important in Ashes to Assets on your helmet for increased super ability gains on grenade final blows. With this core mod setup established, you can fill in any energy cost gaps with things like Bomber on the class item, Recuperation on the boots, Finders on the helmet, and Resistances and Reserves on the chest. You'll also, of course, want to apply a stat mod to each piece, prioritizing resilience, mobility, and intellect in that order. You might think that discipline and strength would be high priorities for a build that is focused on ability spam. However, with how much energy you receive from your exotic armor pieces, class ability, aspects, fragments, and mods, the passive energy you would receive from prioritizing these stats would be absolutely unnoticeable. Now, this is a complicated build, but even the most complicated of builds can be made easy with the Destiny Item Manager build links in my description, customary with all of my build guide videos. I've curated one for both general play and for boss DPS, with each marked appropriately. And if you like those types of links that make your life easier in build videos, I'd appreciate it if you'd consider subscribing to my channel and liking the video. Frankly, I put a lot of effort into making these, and clicking those 2 things below does a lot to help me continue to do so. Now, here is the part where I usually tell you exactly how to play this build to perfection. But the truth is that throughout this video, you've most likely already gotten the gist of how it all functions together, as is the side effect of understanding every component inside and out. However, there are 2 big tips that I have for you that we haven't explicitly covered thus far. The first big piece of advice I have is to be extremely conservative with your class ability. The reality is that you are most likely going to miss your melee ability on occasion, and maintaining uptime on it is the key to making up that final 33% refund to enable the cycling of your grenades on both squishy and tanky targets. Missing this ability and having your dodge on cooldown means you simply have to wait, so be sure you are not using your dodge unless you absolutely need to refund that melee ability. The second key thing to point out is, of course, the boss ability DPS rotation. You'll open with a grenade to refund 66% of your ability energy, followed by a melee toss to make up the rest. This will of course apply enough scorch stacks to ignite the boss. However, if you are quick enough, you should be able to get a second grenade off before the ignition goes off. Since that second grenade will refund 66% once again, the ignite proc will cover the other 33%, giving you a third grenade. After throwing grenade number 3, you'll want to immediately dodge to refund your melee ability to throw again, making up another grenade refund combined with the 66% refund from grenade number 3. Grenade 4 will then proc another ignition, allowing for grenade 5. At this point, your melee ability is on cooldown and thus unable to make up that final 33% needed for grenade 6. Your class ability might be back up thanks to the regeneration from your gloves mods and Ember of Singeing, but if it's not, you'll instead want to throw your blade barrage to compensate and start the rotation all over again. It's a tricky rotation to get down and something you'll definitely need to practice, but believe me when I tell you there isn't anything that feels quite as good as throwing 10 grenades in 10 seconds during a boss DPS phase. I hope you enjoyed today's build video, and I hope you choose to subscribe to see those that I release in the future. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, have a great day.